topic of my talk is the path of efforts and the effortless path. So I'm sure this is a problem that we are all familiar with, and we know that there are no formulas, and who can tell us how to turn efforts into effortlessness. So this is not a recipe, but it's in a way connecting us here in this place at this time with a tradition which is very, very old, and it crops up in different places at different times. Sometimes it is connected with Islam, sometimes it is not. So I'm going to start by reading a poem, and it's not an old poem. It's not a poem which was written by an ancient Sufi master. It's a poem which was sent to me by someone who has been only very briefly exposed to Sufi teaching, at least as far as I know. And by profession, he is an Anglican pastor. He's a youngish man in his 30s, and he joined in a class that I was giving in London this winter for only 10 sessions. And then just before I came here, I got this little pile of poems which he apparently had written, and I didn't know. And they struck me as the product of someone who is a born Sufi. I cannot explain it in any other way. So I'd like to read to you one of these poems which is particularly focused and aligned with the topic of my talk, as if I had invited it. The poem is entitled Mudtar. Now this is an Arabic word. The man does not come from an Arabic background. He just picked up this term as we were going along in the class. And this Arabic word is sometimes translated as constrained, or someone who is under a state of constraint. I think in English it doesn't come very clear, but in the Sufi tradition it has become one of the terms, and in fact it kind of stands in opposition with a term which means he who has free choice. So Mudtar is he who has no free choice. It's one who is compelled into a situation, who has been forced into a state of mind without any elements of freedom of choice. So this is the meaning of the word, and here's the poem. It is always like two people trying to pass through a narrow door, who want to go everywhere with us. But this is the main reason why we lag behind. Who is this other who walks with us? Do we humor this ubiquitous companion? Do we berate or ignore him? The path of spiritual enlightenment stretches away in front, and we don't get past the first hurdle because we are occupied with this little self, this little pleasure seeker who applauds every successful step forward and pulls us back to admire it. We find ourselves in the desert, the valley of confusion, stationary, longing to be detached from the shadow which clings, and not yet grasping the fringes of God's robe. The Absolute cannot free us from this paralysis, lift us straight to the place of clear seeing until we are constrained, yoked without knowing it to the end we desire. receptive, as a cup waiting to be filled, looking at nothing, and consequently no longer distracted by this coveting exhibitionist. Alone, and therefore, to our astonishment, joined. So far the poem. Now, what joins us with the previous bygone generations of Sufis is the fact that now, as then, the mystical quest is a journey through a paradox. While the journey is of the alone to the alone, of the essence with a small e to the essence with a capital E, for most of its parts, for most of its states and stations, we have to reckon with this other, who is always with us. It is always like two people trying to pass through a door at the same time. Now, who is this other? You might be inclined to say that this is the shadow. We quite often use this term, we borrow it. And this is undoubtedly true. But in this talk, our attention is directed to something which we think we know. So it's not a shadow, because a shadow is something that we don't know, just comes here and there, very hazily, very dimly. But this talk is about someone whom we know pretty well, which we think we are in touch with. And this is the I, the little self, the ego. This is the other who joins in whatever we do. And that's why it's always like two people who wants to pass through the door at the same time. I think it's a wonderful image. And we ask ourselves, in an attempt to make this essential issue conscious, we ask ourselves, what is it which makes the I, the ego, the main obstacle on the mystical quest? It's not enough just to say, get rid of the ego. A, we don't know how to do it. B, why? In this question, past joins present. Old Sufis, new Sufis, Middle Eastern Sufis and American Sufis, Muslim Sufis and Anglican Sufis, and Jewish Sufis for that matter, are all in the same boat. It is not only difficult, it is in fact impossible to chuck out, I quote, this little self, this little pleasure seeker who applauds every successful step forward. The ego is always with us. And to say, get rid of the ego, is to ask the impossible. We cannot do it. It can only be done to us when we have reached the state of constraint. In the 11th century, a Sufi by the name of Hujwiri, who lived and traveled in Afghanistan in Central Asia, had put this idea in this way. He says, man is clay, and clay involves impurity. Therefore, purity bears no likeness to acts, nor can human nature be destroyed by means of efforts. Clear and simple. Human nature cannot be destroyed by means of efforts. Now, one of the most difficult aspects of the mystical path is that it demands of us to give up all traces of self-righteousness, all traces of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy not in a social sense, but in the psychological sense. If we are truly sincere, we'll find out sooner or later that this self-righteousness is one of the most difficult things to give up. Not for everyone, perhaps, but for most of us, this is the case. I'd like to emphasize that not for everyone. There are people who by disposition are not inclined to be self-righteous, but For most of us, it is one of the most difficult things to give up, and we don't know how difficult it is. Now, one of the hallmark of this path of Sufism has always been the demand for exacting, non-compromising self-scrutiny and non-sentimental self-examination. There's so much sentimentality around, you know. I wouldn't like to be judgmental, but quite a lot of spiritual life is really a kind of sentimental approach to whatever. And this path has always been about self-scrutiny without any shade of sentimentality. One of the fundamental findings of this examination, this scrutiny, is that the area in which the ego thrives most is efforts. If we are sincere, we shall soon learn that efforts go hand in hand with the ego. They cannot be divorced from the ego. Sufi teaching is very helpful in the way it analyzes efforts. You see, we don't have to invent it. The tradition is there, and it's very psychological. The plane of efforts is seen in the Sufi manuals as belonging to different stages or stations of the mystical path. Sufi teaching is very scientific, is very exact, and it has created a terminology. And in this terminology, Sufis call, they have a term which is maqamat, to stages and stations on the path. And these stages or stations, the maqamat, belong to the ethical, to the willful, to the disciplined and ego-controlled work that one has to put into the process of transformation that the mystical quest demands. In other words, we of course have to put efforts. We have to progress from one stage to the other. Hujwiri, the same Sufi, the 11th century Sufi that I've quoted from before, defines station in the following way. I'll quote, "Station denotes the wayfarer's standing or the wayfarer's position in the way to God, the extent to which he fulfills the obligations required by a particular station, and his perseverance in that station until he achieves its perfection as far as lies in a man's power." So on the one hand, Hujwiri tells us that efforts or real mystical achievement is beyond efforts. And on the other hand, he tells us, look, there is efforts to be made. So, immediately, a paradox. Thus, the maqamat, the stations, reflect the arduous process by which human strength and perseverance are put to the test and are stretched to the limit. From this angle, the journey demands tremendous willpower. And remember, willpower comes from the ego, nowhere else. It is associated with pain, with suffering, and with sacrifice. To understand the full implication of this statement means, among other things, to go deep into the meaning and sense of suffering, and in particular, suffering which becomes part of the mystical quest, which becomes part of the process of awakening to our real nature. Because you see, suffering is there, whether we like it or not. People killed, there's tremendous bloodshed, poverty, restlessness, hate, persecution. But there's an intrinsic difference between suffering, just suffering, and suffering with intention, suffering from intent, suffering from an awakening to our real nature. Why suffering? Because when we suffer, especially when we suffer because of a great injury, because of a great injustice that has been done to us. And especially when we realize that there is no remedy in our hands to counteract our suffering, we may then truthfully lay away the illusion that we are in control of things. In other words, we may then truthfully, and I do emphasize this word, truthfully, realize the incapacity, the incompetence, the impotence of this other, this ego who rushes with us to the door when we wanted to move through the mystical path. We have to realize its true impotence. This is a very subtle piece of teaching. I have emphasized truthfully because this outer teaching can only become an inner realization except through cannot become an inner realization except through direct experiences. It's not enough that I say this or that we read it. Also, and this is important, it is not at all a question of glorifying suffering like some traditions do. It's not a question of glorifying suffering in its own right. Sufi teaching is clear about this. It is not blind suffering which redeems us, but suffering out of which comes this state of constraint, a state in which we let go of the notion that we have real power to control or direct our lives and destinies. Let us go back to the way Sufi teaching describes the need to go through efforts and exertion in order to realize that human nature cannot be destroyed by efforts. When we make an effort, and when we are conscious of the effort we make, we cannot avoid a certain amount of bargaining, a certain amount of calculation or end-gaining, to borrow a term from the Alexander technique. I've given up so much that I desire to see progress. I mean, this is innate in the nature of an effort. I make an effort for a particular purpose. So I want to see progress. Or, indeed, I can notice in myself a tremendous change. And many other observations of this kind. Now, these ego-centered calculations and observations are unavoidable. We are always in this dialogue with the other inside. It's unavoidable. It's part of our consciousness. It is indeed, and I quote again, like two people trying to pass through a door at the same time. Hence, sooner or later, via efforts, not humiliation and surrender come, but pure inflation. And this is the law. It's a law that has to be reckoned with on the path of inner transformation. An extremely subtle law which creates a paradoxical vicious circle. Without efforts, I cannot make progress. The result of my efforts are the indication of the progress I've made. And yet, when I take stock of these results of my efforts that I have made, I fall into the trap set for me by my calculating ego, by the nafs, to use the Sufi term. The nafs is that part of the psyche which ascribes everything to itself. In the same token, this is also the seat of the ego consciousness, of the I consciousness. From this psychic center, one is aware of one needs, the myriads of needs that our our ego is starved for. The need for warmth, the need for success, the need for recognition. It is through the ego or nafs that I feel fulfilled or frustrated, successful or failing. Now, when I have a goal, an object, and the goal is won, the nafs is gratified. Even when my goal is highly virtuous, spiritual, commendable, and particularly difficult, probably especially then, it is inconceivable to prevent the ego from taking recognition of this achievement. Most interesting is to observe that the identification of the ego with the object of the quest is particularly strong in the arena of spiritual experiences. We can say, oh, the ego is about lust, it's about desires, it's about living a kind of instinctual life. No, it's particularly strong in the arena of spiritual experiences. Now, no experience, no matter how lofty, is immune of being possessed by the ego, which always ascribes it to itself. My visions, my dreams, my experiences, my intuition, my perseverance, my surrender. The nafs is thus recognized in Sufi psychology as that sly, power-driven component which in endless cunning and deceptive ways undermines the process of the quest, simply because the object of the quest always transcends the ego, while the ego, by definition, is always self-centered. I'd like to read this again. The nafs is recognized in Sufi psychology as that sly, power-driven component which in endless cunning and deceptive ways undermines the process of the quest, simply because the object of the quest always transcends the ego, while the ego, by definition, is always self-centered. There couldn't be a greater paradox. The point at which the sincere seeker encounters the full consequence of this vicious circle becomes a crucial turning point. He encounters the impossibility of extracting himself from the ego. I quote again from this amazing poem. We collide with that eager, bothersome wayfarer who wants to go everywhere with us. This little pleasure seeker who applauds every successful step forward and pulls us back to admire it. Such a perceptive way of putting it. At this point, which is a point of no return, the wayfarer sees with clear and disillusioned vision that it is impossible to achieve the object of his quest, sincere as it may be, through his own will and efforts. Disillusionment, bewilderment, and true humility replace the former elated inflation. The recognition of the futility of all his efforts makes absolutely clear to him his human limitation. Sufi teaching is unequivocal. Only at this point can one truly know one's right position in front of God. One can never achieve this knowledge through dogmatic creed, through theological teaching, or through moral preaching. It is only then that one realizes one's true servant nature, and it is with the same breath that one truly realizes God's sovereign nature, God's aspect of majesty. This point is always an impasse on the path. It is the point from where we cannot proceed. It is the point of total despair. And it is this point of despair, and it can never be brought about by merely willing it, which turns the table once and for all. It is at this point on one's personal path that one reaches the state of constraint. Idtirar in Arabic. The Absolute cannot free us from this paralysis, writes this Anglican priest, cannot lift us straight to the place of clear vision until we are constrained, yoked without knowing it to the end that we desire, looking at nothing, and consequently no longer distracted by this coveting exhibitionist. Alone, and the four, to our astonishment, joined. Now the term constrained or constraint come from a Quranic verse. This is verse number 62 of Surah 27. And this is how it reads. He who answers the constrained when he calls unto him, and removes the evil, and appoints you to be successors in the earth. Is there a God with God? This is a verse which has been commented upon many, many times, and I won't go into the commentary, but just to focus on this tradition that goes and extract this term mudtar, constrained, from the Quran. As I've already said, in the state of constraint, one loses the freedom of choice. This is one of the most difficult things for modern Western men to accept. To lose the right to choose, to lose the notion of free will, is a great test for our so-called liberty and equality-oriented psyche. I'm not just saying this, it's really difficult. And indeed, the deeper understanding of this state calls for a great capacity for discretion in our personal and communal relationships, because it's not losing one's choice to choose, one freedom to choose in this sense. But as far as the mystical journey, there are no two ways about it. Before one reaches this stage of utter despair, this total impasse, one is still caught within the trappings of the ego. Many years ago, quite a few years before I had first crossed the threshold of Mrs. Tweedy's flat, I encountered something similar to a state of constraint. At that time, I was writing my dissertation on an early Muslim mystic from Transoxania, Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi. And I came across the following passages, which are translated here from the Arabic original. Since what at-Tirmidhi had written corresponded so deeply to what I had been experiencing, the impact of the teaching contained in these passages has remained with me ever since. I quote, "And when the seeker has exhausted all his sincere efforts, and has found that his nafs and all its features are alive and well, he falls into bewilderment, and his genuine efforts cease. He says, 'How can I prevent my nafs from being gratified by the sweetness of these spiritual experiences? he realizes that he can do it no more than white hair can turn black. He says, I've harnessed my nafs with my true submission to God, but it has broken off and gone loose. How shall I capture it again? And so he falls into the wilderness of confusion. There he strays alone, lonely and desolate. No longer is he close to himself, nor is he as yet close to God. He becomes constrained and bewildered. He does not know whether to go forward or backward. Despairing of his sincerity, he cries out to God, empty-handed, his heart empty of any effort. And thus he says in his heart's communication, you, who know all the hidden things, you know that there is not even one step in the arena of true efforts left for me. You rescue me. Then compassion reaches him, and he is spared. From the place where his sincere efforts stopped, his heart is lifted up in a flash to the platform of proximity at the divine throne. And in the spaces of unity, he expands. This is the meaning of God's words. He who answers the constrained when he calls unto him. This verse informs you, says At-Tirmidhi, that the passion of your heart for sincere self-exertion will not remove the evil from you and will not answer what you call for until you call and the passion of your heart be directed towards God alone, who had made the hearts passionately constrained and reliant on him. Look, these are words which were written so many centuries ago. He lived in the 9th century, so it's 1100 years ago, and they ring so up to date, at least to me. Of all Sufi masters, it was Al-Hakim At-Tirmidhi who, at a very early stage in the development of Sufi psychology, analyzed minutely this turning point on the path. I shall quote one more passage from his book, which was based on his own experiences and insights, and which he entitled The Journey of the Friends of God. So here's another passage. The constrained, who has stopped bewildered in the wilderness, not knowing which way to go, is spurred by divine compassion and is delivered by divine help. He who wanders constrained in the wastelands of the road to him is the one who truly merits divine compassion and relief. He is spurred by compassion because his call is truly sincere. It cannot be truly sincere until he becomes constrained, with nothing to hold on to and with no one to turn to. He who looks with one eye to God and with the other eye to his efforts is not truly constrained, and his call is not truly sincere. When the call of this constrained is answered, his heart is lifted in a flash to the abode of the free and noble. For any one of us, the point of constraint happens at different stages on the path. It has to do with the widening of our inner horizons, with a strange pattern in which veils are lifted to reveal to us more and more and more about our own nature, our own resistances and blind spots. We don't know too much when we start. The energy of the path and of the tradition may take us in a storm, or may come as a small voice of silence when we are least ready to give up, when we are in the midst of a struggle which is a struggle for life and death, sanity or insanity. We hold on with all our might to our perceptions, our illusions of what is right and what is wrong, what is just and what is unjust, how things ought to be and how they ought not to be. We think we know. And when we have been on a spiritual path and with a teacher for any length of time, we may really think that we know what is required of us or what is required of somebody else. We even allow ourselves at times to tell others what's right for them from a spiritual point of view. I mean, really, frankly, honestly speaking, spirituality is snubbed in the Sufi tradition. It's hypocrisy. But eventually, at some point or another, the energy of the path and the lineage of blessed teachers take us right to the edge of our knowledge and of our being. And in the experience of the edge, everything melts. All of a sudden, in a flash, to quote Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, we know surrender. Because to be driven to the edge is to be driven beyond fear and despair. Now, despair in itself is a state beyond fear. So to be in the state of despair is already quite advanced. But when we have given up all hope and provided that our inner orientation, our unconscious, pivotal yearning is aligned somewhere without consciously knowing, without being able to manipulate or interfere, when we have truly given up all hope, then, and only then, we become surrendered. Until we are constrained, yoked, without knowing it, to the end that we desire, receptive as a cup waiting to be filled, looking at nothing. It is out of this experience, if divine compassion is indeed there, that we truly understand and accept why teachers are at times so ruthless, so seemingly unjust. It is always one or the other. Either the teacher is ruthless, severe, fickle, or the teaching that comes from life's experiences. Whatever it is, there comes a point in which we are left utterly confused, utterly bewildered, with nothing to hold on to and with no one to turn to. It's interesting that in this book, The Conference of the Birds, which describes in a symbolic sort of way the journey of the birds to the king of the birds, the Simurgh, it's interesting that in the description of the valleys that the birds has to cross on the journey, the valley of bewilderment is one of the last valleys. It's almost the last. The very last one is nothingness. Poverty and nothingness. So it's a very weird path. It doesn't promise anything but nothingness and confusion. So it is out of this experience, if divine compassion is there, that we truly understand the ruthlessness of the teachers. The greatest test at this point is whether or not we are willing to give up every last bit of self-pity or resentment in the face of our predicaments, whether outer or inner. Tweedy used to say, "Quarrel with God, argue with him, I do, until the tables are turned." She often used to quote this verse by Rumi, "And I cry and I cry and I cry until the milk of compassion boils on your lips." At the same time, she used to warn that the worst thing on the mystical path is feeling sorry for oneself. It is a feature which some are more inclined to have than others, and it needs to be recognized. Because there is suffering and there is suffering, there are tests and there are tests. God is one, but He has many faces. Sometimes He reveals Himself to us through the face of deviousness. In Arabic it's called makr. We fight this aspect with all our might. Can God indeed deceive us? Can God really fight us, torment us, destroy us, take everything away from us? Now here's another poem by this Anglican priest who became so inspired by Sufi images and teaching. In this poem, he has captured something very profound in the essence of our relationship with God and with the seemingly devious nature of the path. He writes, "Showing the unattractive face may be a gambit, turning you from the worn, time-hallowed image which has become repugnant, to seek new appearances in another place. But God has many disguises, and the closely guarded secret is a deviousness that will not balk at loading you with shit to draw you into grace." Not only God seems devious, also the teacher. This was the experience which Mrs. Tweedy had to go through with her teacher, Baisa. The more stubborn, the more self-opinionated and righteous she was, the more ruthless he had to become, and often in what appeared to be an unjust manner. Here is a short quotation. "Oh, please help me," she wrote in her diary. "I'm so confused." "Why should I?" He looked straight at me. "If I begin to help you, you will ask again and again for help. How will you cross the stream? You must do it yourself. I will not help. We all had to cross the stream alone. Don't you realize that this is the way? I'm telling you. I'm showing you the way, the only way. Why don't you realize that you are nothing?" Complete surrender, it means. It takes time. It is not done in one day. It takes time to surrender. How long? A whole life? 20, 30 years? If you live thousands years won't be enough. Sometimes you are near, sometimes very far away. I'm helping you as a matter of fact, but you cannot be aware of it, and I will never say so. My harsh words help you. My sweetness never will. You have renounced the world, all the material things, but have you renounced your character? Have you renounced your will? The character, together with the will, molds the life of a person. If you have not renounced your will, the surrender has not yet begun. A modern disciple, a very ancient teaching, the teaching of constraint. How can one renounce one's will? By will? through efforts? This is a contradiction in terms. One cannot do it. But it can. It was, and it will be done. Man is clay, and clay involves impurity. Therefore, purity bears no likeness to acts, nor can human nature be destroyed by means of efforts. The mystery of suffering and pain lies right here. And where the mystery of pain becomes unraveled, there is redemption. Here are a few Sufi sayings which brings this idea home. Tests are the lamp of the mystics, the true awakening of those who keep wakeful at night, and the destruction of those who are heedless. Tests can destroy, and they can redeem. Poverty is an ocean of suffering, but the whole of suffering is divine glory. Suffering is the seed of repentance and the threshold of love. The divine can be revealed only there where created beings are weak. Suffering introduces God utterly alone to the heart. It is through the very failings of certain people's freedom of choice that divine mercy comes nakedly to give itself to all of its fullness. God's mercy comes to us through what outwardly appears as contradicting His law, namely through suffering, deviousness, injustice, pain. And it is then given wholly, directly, inwardly. This is what suffering is about. It is through the application of the remedy to misfortunes and heartbreak that divine mercy comes into the heart and transforms the personality where efforts failed. This is known as testing, bala in Arabic. And according to a well-known hadith, a piece of tradition, no one suffered more bala than God's elect, the prophets and the friends of God. In Rumi, this master of love, surrender and poetry, describes the absurdity of the relationship between the human lover and the divine beloved in these crazy images. That beauty handed me a broom, saying, "Stir up the dust from the sea." He then burned the broom in the fire, saying, "Bring up the broom out of the fire." In bewilderment, I made prostration before him. He said, "Without a prostrator, offer great and graceful prostration." Ah, how prostrate without a prostrator? He said, unconditionally, without personal impulse. I lowered my neck and said, "Cut off the head of a prostrator with this ancient sword." The more he struck with the sword, the more my head grew, till heads a myriad sprouted from my neck. I was a lamp, and every head of mine was a wick. Sparks flew on every side. Candles sprang up out of my head. East to west was filled with a train. What are east and west in the placeless? A dark bath stove and a bath at work. You whose temperament is cold, where is the anxiety of your hearts? How long this dwelling at rest in these baths? These deep pieces of beauty and wisdom can make sense only from a real experience. We know through experiencing. Sufis call this way of knowing dhawq, tasting. If these quotations and this presentation make any sense at all, it is because I have not been saying anything that you may not have experienced anyway, in one way or another. Reading the biographies of the friends of God, the awliya, puts us in touch with our own suffering, our own confusions and broken hearts. The value of these readings is in the validation that they give to our own experiences of constraint. The other day I copied a precious statement which succinctly sums up the nature of mystical knowledge. It's the same with anything. You don't understand until you are what you are trying to understand. On the mystical path, knowing is being. The two cannot be divorced. I cannot emphasize it enough. We understand from our being, and the scope of our knowledge expands with the expansion of our being, with the unveiling of ever-increasing layers of being. Tweedy used to say, we're so deep, there's no end to us. It reveals itself. It has been accepted in the consensus of the Sufi teaching that at the beginning of the mystical path, efforts are indispensable. This too we know only too well from our own experiences. At the beginning, everything is effort. In fact, not right at the very beginning, because then there might be a period of sheer grace, a glimpse into the future, an outlook into the vast spaces of possibilities. It is in a way like having an auspicious initial dream at the beginning of analysis or at the beginning of a journey. Last year, Llewellyn spoke of a woman who had been coming to the group for 2 years or so, and she told him, for 2 months I knew nothing but bliss. Then I had 2 years of sheer misery. We all have to go through this. Just beware of feeling sorry for yourselves. Now, from the point of the old teaching and the old terminology which derives from Arabic, the wayfarer on the path at the first stage of his travel is called murid. Murid means someone who wants to attain something, someone who has a goal, a purpose, an aim. It has become the norm to translate it as novice. According to Al-Hallaj, the 9th-10th century mystic of Baghdad, who was executed because of his ecstatic, blasphemous, mystical utterances, according to him, in the phase of novicehood, the murids progress from station to station through the path of efforts. This is called mujahada. It is connected with jihad. Jihad is a term that all of us know in a political sense or in a military sense. This is a holy war. The Sufis say that jihad is the holy inner war. So this is the path of efforts, and it's part of the irada, part of novicehood. This is the ascetic phase of the journey, and one is constantly put to the tests of perseverance and rejection. It is ever so easy to get stuck in this phase, to identify with efforts, to identify with practices, to identify with the willful aspect of the path. But this, in fact, is only the beginning. The next phase, according to Al-Hallaj, is the phase of constraint, of passive purification. In this phase, the murid becomes a murad. Now, Arabic is a very flexible language. It's very easy to move from the active voice to the passive voice. So murid is the active and murad is the passive. So it means the one desired, the one who has become the aim, the purpose of God, the one whom God desires. It is at this phase that one starts having glimpses of oneness, because the deepest sense of the unity between man and God becomes revealed in flashes of insight or in deep state of meditation at this stage. At this phase, one loses all desires, all wishes, all sense of will. One has given up willing. One has given up making willful efforts. This state of being is 100% given. It cannot be achieved by efforts. It's pure grace, and it has to do with a point of despair, with the experience of the abyss about which I have previously spoken. If you remember in Daughter of Fire, there comes a time when Tweedy writes that she has no desire to ask any more questions. And this is very much in contrast with the first part, which is all over the place, with questions and objections and ideas and things. So there comes a time that one loses all desires. Another thing that Baisab said to Tweedy, he said, there are disciples and there are devotees. Devotees are those who do not have any desires. They do not have any questions, just to sit at the feet of the teacher. Then comes the third phase, and it is named by Hallaj Ayn al-Jama. This is the Arabic, which is very difficult to translate, but it's more or less the essence of union, the pinpointed state of oneness, or living in the center point of stillness. In this phase, one goes back to life, to live out a seemingly ordinary life in an extraordinary way. All resistances have fallen away. All sense of identifying with the ego has fallen away. It's not that the ego has died. This cannot be while we are alive, while we are in the world, in the body, on this earthly, lovely plane. But there is no identification, because whatever the circumstances, whatever the oscillations from state to state, one is constantly somewhere in a state of oneness. This is not a mental state, and it cannot be achieved by efforts. But it can also not be achieved, but it cannot be achieved without efforts. This is the paradox which lies at the heart of the Sufi tradition, for which Sufis have been scorned laughed and persecuted for many centuries. At this stage, one lives in a state of complete receptivity, complete fluidity, complete transparency, although he may have also developed at the same time the capacity to put all appearances against himself. He becomes devious, to change colors according to the needs of the moment. It is very difficult and at the same time very blessing to live around such people. This is the stage of wilaya, the stage where the mystic becomes the friend of God, a wali. Through men who have reached this stage, grace and blessing flow. It is said that when the friends of God are seen, God is seen. Their breath is the breath of God. Some of those who have reached this stage become teachers, guides, acknowledged beacons of light. Some remain hidden, unknown to the world, working from the mystery of the inner secret of being. A famous hadith Qudsi, that is to say, a piece of tradition which is reported in the name of God. So a famous hadith Qudsi, which is probably the most frequently quoted piece of tradition in Sufi literature, identifies this state of being thus: my servant does not draw near to me by performing the obligatory commandments. He draws near to me by acts of devotion. And then I love him. And when I love him, I become his ears, his eyes, his tongue, his hands, his legs, and his heart. He hears by me, he speaks by me, he handles by me, he walks by me, and he comprehends by me. It is probably from this state of being that the following poem, with which I'm going to end, came out of Al-Hallaj. For most of his fellow men, for his companions, this was too shocking to bear. Even Junaid, who had been his teacher, could not approve of the extrovert way in which Al-Hallaj exposed, divulged the secrets of this state of being. In later generations, however, Al-Hallaj's poetry became the staple diet of Sufi groups, and thus it has been saved for us. It hasn't fallen into oblivion, and we too may have a taste of it. So this is the poem. Your spirit is mixing with my spirit, just as wine is mixing with pure water. And when something touches you, it touches me. Now you are me in everything. You are there, between the linings of the heart and the heart. You escape from it by slipping like tears from eyelids. And you infuse the personal consciousness inside my heart as spirits are infused into bodies. Ah, nothing immobile moves without you. You move it by a hidden spring, O crescent of the moon, which appears on the 14th of the month, as on the 8th, the 4th, the 2nd. I have become the one I love, and the one I love has become me. We are two spirits infused in a single body, and to see me is to see him, and to see him is to see us. Here I am. Here I am, oh my secret, oh my trust. Here I am. Here I am, oh my hope, oh my meaning. I call to you. No, it is you who calls me to yourself. How could I say it is you if you had not said to me, it is I? O essence of the essence of my existence, O the aim of my intent, O you who make me speak, O you my utterances, you my winks, O all of my all, O my hearing and my sight, O my assembling, my composition and my parts, O all of my all, the all of all things, the equivocal enigma. It is the all of your all that I obscure in wanting to express you. O you, by whom my spirit was hanged, already dying of ecstasy, ah, keep its token in my anguish. O highest thing I ask and hope for, O my host, O food of my spirit, O my life in this world and the next, let my heart be your ransom, O my hearing, O my sight. Why do you keep me so long at such a distance? Ah, though you hide in what is invisible to my eyes, my heart already beholds you in my distance, yeah, in my exile.